During the previous weeks, we reviewed a number of dynamics with significant cross-border consequences. Last week, we took a step back and reviewed whether we have the cultural, conceptual tools to survive and flourish in an interdependent world with these many centripetal forces and this much cross-border consequences. This week, we are going to discuss global governance and global public goods. There are two readings for this week. One of them you were supposed to complete before this lecture. If you haven't already done so, stop the lecture now, go back to your reading. This is the report of the International Task Force on Global Public Goods. You will get more out of this lecture if you had already done the reading. Our lecturer this week is Javier Solana. Javier Solana is not only a distinguished academic, a physicist by training, but he's also a statesman. He was the foreign minister of Spain. He then became the foreign policy high representative of the European Union. He's now the president of ESADE in Spain. He will walk us through what public goods are, global public goods are, and where our current state of global governance stands. Here's what he has to say.
Today we are going to discuss global public goods and the way to deal with them. We will find out what a public good is and what the difference between a public good and a global public good is about. Let me start by defining what is a public good. Probably the best way to define a public good is to analyze the way the good is consumed. When we look at goods from that angle, there are very important two attributes which really define the public good. The first is that the public good is not excludable. What does it mean? That means that it's impossible to block someone from consuming the good, even if he or she has contributed nothing to the production of the good. And that is something we'll come back again because it's very important. To make this more concrete, we can look, for example, at clean air. We all need clean air to breathe. It is a biological necessity. And what is more is all around us, and no one can be excluded. That is very important. No one can be excluded from breathing or using it. This means that even people that pollute the air, that do not contribute to the provision of this good, can enjoy the clean air that others have contributed to provide it. They did not contribute to the production, as I said, but cannot be excluded from using it. This is the same for people and also for countries, that they do not contribute and they have the right to benefit from it. The second defining characteristic of a public good is that public goods are non-rivalrous. Let's see if I can explain this well. This means that when we use a public good, one that uses it, suppose that I'm the one who uses it, I do not subtract from the possibility of others to use it. And that is not because I consume the good that there is less or there's left less for someone else to use it. In other words, when I consume the good, I do not deplete it. And let me see if we can explain that in a more clear manner through an example. Let me use the example of knowledge. Knowledge, when scientists do research, discover new processes in nature, come up with an idea which is new, that becomes public, the fact is that others can profit from that discovery. The fact that I discover something, I make that useful for others. so that others can use it and the good is not depleted because it exists and others do use it. I think this is another very important characteristic or attribute of a public good, that the fact that I use it or somebody else uses it, it does not deplete the good. And that these two attributes are very, very important. Let me remind again, the fact that you cannot prevent anybody in principle to use it, even if they do not contribute to the provision. And the second thing is that the fact that I have the good offered to, I have the good as a public good, the fact that I use it, it does not prevent a second person or a second group of people to use it. Now, what I said is attributable to people, but the same thing can be said about countries. You cannot prevent a country collectively to use a good if it's available, and at the same time you can have countries that not providing or not contributing to the provision of the good have the right to use it. Okay, this is the most important thing that I would like to say about the definition. I hope that this is clear. Let's see what are the consequences of this definition. There are two, the most important consequences of this definition. First, that whenever we have a public good, we can find what we may call free riders. As I said before, there are people who benefit from the good without paying for the cost or contributed in any way to their production, to their supply. These people, in other words, get all the benefits and suffer not any cost. The second is that in case of public goods, the classical mechanics of market and provision do not work, because no one can be blocked or can be excluded from using the good. Classic actors, say classic companies, have no incentive to provide the good because they will not get paid for it. Therefore, we have a particular category of goods, these global goods, which are subject to these two principles or attributes that I will define them. Now, the question that we have to ask now is who provides, therefore, after all that we have said, who provides the public goods? Now, let's see and analyze first what happens at the national level. At the national level, public goods are provided fundamentally by governments. They provide the norms, they provide the rules, they have the authority to regulate the public production of goods in various ways. They work to supply them. In many cases, they also have the power to sanction free riders, as we have mentioned before. At the global level, however, the situation is way much more difficult. Public goods are much more difficult to supply. And you will agree with me that there is no such a thing as a global government, unfortunately, so far, and therefore we don't have at the global level the same elements that we have at the national level. The nation state has possibilities that still we don't have at the global level. Although we have now assets or institutions that can help the governance of the world, we do not have a global government, and probably will not have in many years to come. Therefore, the structure at the global level are far inferior in characteristics and capacity to the ones that we have at national level. This makes, therefore, public goods to be much more difficult to be provided. Now, having said that, I would like, in what is left of the class, to go through some examples that will help to clarify these definitions that I just made to you, and see if with that we can get a more clear idea, a more clear picture of what we are talking about. I will take three examples. Let me start by the first. The first example I would like to talk to you about is climate change. I'm sure you have a background of what are the problems of climate change from the scientific approach. Let's look at it from the public good approach. The situation today is that we have a public good which is sustainability of the climate. Let me give you some simple facts. The world today has over 7 billion people on the planet. The UN has calculated by 2050 probably the population will be 9 billion. That means 2 billion more. That is more than one China more, and that only in a very few number of years. But it's not just the number, which is very important, the growth of population. But it's very important also that we realize the not only the quantity, but also the quality of the growth. What do I mean with that? That in the growth, it will be also a growth in what we may call middle class. That means people that are going or coming out of poverty and entering to the first levels of middle class. To define the middle class is not easy. We have several definitions. Let me take one. I will take the definition that is given by Goldman Sachs, which is not perfect, but let's take that, which is people which are in input annually between $6,000 and $30,000 annually, adjusted by PPP. By 2030, let me repeat, by 2030, that means tomorrow, it is expected that some 2 billion people will be joining the middle class. That means that the patterns of consumption in the world will change dramatically. 2 billion people, again, is more than the population of China. In a very short period of time, we have a population of China that get out of poverty and enter into what we may call middle class. You can imagine that these people are going to change habits of behavior, they're going to eat differently, they're going to consume probably more proteins, some of the animal proteins, they're going to consume more energy, and you can imagine the difficulty and the effect that all of that is going to have on climate change. Therefore, if we do not have a very big effort collectively to tackle this problem, it will be very difficult that we leave a planet that will be at the disposal of the next generation of people. The planet that we will leave to the next generation will be a planet impossible to live in. As an example, I used to say that when you are in your office or you are in your job and you have a plan, let's call it Plan A, and the Plan A fails, you can always find in a drawer that you have under the table what we may call a Plan B. In this case, we have a Planet A, and we don't have a Planet B. Therefore, we have to arrange our collective life today in this planet, knowing that the rest of the people who come after us will have to live in the same planet. So our responsibility is enormous, and this is not a joke. So how do we handle this public global good, which is stability of the climate? Well, now I would like to take a look at the institutions that exist out there to supply these goods that we have called climate stability. The first point I would like to mention is one that I find critically important in this case. In 1988, the IPCC was founded. That means the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. And remember that name because it will come over and over again in the literature and maybe today. It gathered, this is very important, scientists from all over the world. in order to supply the world's governments and the institutions with the advice of the scientific community. My personal experience is that without this scientific consensus, it would have been very difficult some years ago, to have the political consensus that we have been able to bring about. The fact that the international scientific community agreed on the challenges that climate change will bring to us, it has been fundamental. I still remember I'm not going to mention the countries, in several of my travels in countries we're talking to, 10 or 15 years ago, to the leaders. They were suspicious about if we were talking seriously about climate change. After 1988, when the scientific community said very clearly in Italy that this is a big problem, I think that political people need to start to change. The change has not been rapid, the change has been slow, but there's no question that today the question of climate change is a problem that everybody faces with the scientific knowledge, or with the knowledge that the scientific consensus exists. As I said, this is the first institution, the IPCC, which is the scientific. Let me go to the second one, which is the institution that in the classical, in the web you will find that is called the UNFCCC, not double C, but triple C, which is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Let's see, we talk about the scientific consensus in 1988. The first political consensus was signed in 1992 at the convention at Rio, or at the summit that took place in Rio. Let me tell you that currently there are 195, which is a lot, parties to the convention. The parties meet regularly. Parties mean countries. They meet regularly at different levels. But at least once per year, in November or December, they meet at the summit level to adopt regulations, mitigation for emissions, adaptations, climate finances, etc. In 1997, the convention took an important step with the signing of the so-called Kyoto Protocol, that probably you have heard about it. It contained the first ever binding emission reduction targets. Many countries signed the protocol, but its binding emission reductions were only designed to be applied by a group of states, namely the ones who emitted in the past and were able, through these unabated emissions, to develop industrially. What I just said is very important. As you know, there is suspicion in several developing countries that the whole idea of climate change is just a manner to prevent other countries in the way of developing themselves industrially. To clarify that point, to make it clear to everybody that this is scientifically proved a problem that we have to face together, those who have been developed already and those who have to be developed in the future, I think is fundamental. To create trust, and a strategic trust among different countries, ones who are developed and those who are on the way of being emerging, or they are emerging already, is absolutely fundamental. Although many countries signed the Kyoto Protocol, I remember it was 195, I think it was, the important thing that the number of countries that ratified the Kyoto Protocol, unfortunately, were very few. And among those who didn't ratify the protocol were very important developed countries. And that was a big blow to the whole scheme of the Kyoto Protocol. So not all the big emitters have committed themselves to reduce emissions. Nevertheless, other important countries did sign up and are committed to pushing the emission reduction agenda forward. And I would like to underline that among those countries are the members of the European Union, which on this matter have been leaders globally. Now, having said all this, I think it's the moment to talk about how the market can work in this, in solving this problem, and how the market cannot contribute. As we said before, the global goods are outside the market. The market cannot regulate them. But there are always mechanisms their way, or therefore some ideas and some suggestions can be put on the table so that some elements of the market can be provided or can be used. One example, for instance, is the so-called cap and trade system. The idea is very simple. That is that a national or international cap, limit, can be put on emissions of countries, and that below that cap permits for trading the capacity for increasing their emission can be accepted. Some examples of these systems are already in place. Remember what I said, is to apply a mechanism below a certain cap, and beyond that allow the market to play, but without going above the cap that has been played. So below that you can make a change among countries, but without crossing the cap that has been organized and agreed by the international community. Now, these examples, mechanisms that exist already, were started by the European Union. It was the first group of countries that did it in 2005, and it was followed later on by countries like Australia, which put another cap and trade mechanism, and there are an intra-state scheme working in the United States, and some pilot projects starting up as we speak, even in China. So we have news which are very good, and we have at the same time the sentiment that things are not going sufficiently rapidly. And why so difficult? The question is knowing that we have a problem, which is a problem that will suffer everybody, that it cannot be solved without the cooperation of everybody, that when we pollute your sky, you pollute the sky. You cannot make a barrier and pollute only your sky of a certain country, but you pollute the whole sky. Knowing all this, having the scientific support, the scientific clear data that gives you certainty that this is going to be on that direction, it will be very, very bad for the development of the human species. Why so slow? Why we don't do more? Why so difficult? Well, the reason why it's so difficult lied in several aspects. Let me mention some of them. In maintaining climate stability, as I said before, the most important risk, or the most important problem that we have is how do we deal what we have called before free riders. And let me remind you what we said it meant free riders. Are people or countries that without supplying to the production or the provision or the supply of that good, they use it. And the more free rider that exists, of course, as you can imagine, the more difficult it is to govern the problem from the global point of view. Another important thing is that the history of every country in this matter is very different. There are countries that developed their economy after the Industrial Revolution, that they have achieved a level of development which is very high in relation to the emerging economies. And as I said before, for some of the emerging economies, this idea of climate change and the manner in which it's treated by the developed countries may be perceived as an imposition by the rich countries, by the developed countries, into the developing countries, so that the growth, and particularly the speed of their growth, could be limited by this, for them, artificial idea of climate change. Again, talking about this is what I like to underline once again, the importance of the scientific community consensus. The scientific community consensus is built up not only of scientists from the developing countries, it's also from scientists from China, from India, from many other countries in the world. So the consensus that this is a very serious problem is there from the scientific point of view. Now we have to really achieve the corollary of this scientific community consensus into a political consensus, and try to convince everybody that this is a serious problem that requires the effort of everybody to resolve it. So the question of free riding, we have to see how we handle it. It's not going to be easy, but as time goes by, we are trying to see or to find mechanisms to advance. It's true that we don't move at the speeds that some of us we would like to move, but it's true that some motion is taking place. I think this gives you an idea for this example. Some conclusion from this example. Something which is clear from this example that shows the complication of the definition that we mentioned at the beginning of what is a public good. And that the only way to solve these dramatic problems is cooperation. It cannot be competition. It has to be cooperation. We will only be able to achieve the stable climate if we all work together. No other way. And therefore another appeal of cooperation or true cooperation that I would like to make at this point in the class. Well, we are going to finish this example. Let me say again that we have the obligation, you, me, and many others, to speak loudly and clear about this topic, because to resolve the production or the provision, the supply of these public goods, which we may call a stability of climate, or if you wish, to have the possibility of clean air, which is necessary for us to breathe, is fundamental. Therefore, I wanted to put a little bit more time on this example due to the very profound and important that has for all of us and for those who will come after us. Let me move on to the second example I would like to discuss with you in this conversation. It's a different from a different domain, but I think also very important because it's very human, the type of example I'm going to place as the second. Is related to global health and the eradication of communicable diseases. The eradication of communicable diseases is also a public good. In order, and I would like to underline this very much, in order to fully eradicate a communicable disease, one ingredient is absolutely vital. The eradication has to be complete and has to be final. Viruses do not respect borders, which means that only 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 cases are left in the world, the disease will spread, it will come back and increase numbers and will not fully disappear. This makes eradication of communicable diseases a very fundamental issue in global health. And global health, as I said before, should be considered as a global good. And one important thing is the weakest link. So the place where the the last effort has to be done is as important as the first. Because if we don't clean completely, if we don't eradicate completely the disease, it's like not having done it at all. Now, in the years, in the later years, we have been able to eradicate only, and that is very important to think about it, only one communicable disease, which is smallpox. It was a big triumph of humankind. Since 1980, smallpox has been declared as eradicated. And all of the world's population is saved from this effect. But again, since 1980, no one in the world has the world as such, has spent a single penny into vaccination against this disease. This is a virtual guarantee they will not come back. But again, it's only one. There are many. Smallpox is the only one that has been eradicated. And as I said before, this is a fantastic triumph of the 20th century. But we have many others that we are just about to have it eradicated, but they are not eradicated yet. And therefore, they may return. The most dramatic case, one of the most dramatic cases, is the polio. Polio is a terrible illness, and as you know. And we would like very much, all of us, to make all the effort necessary to eradicate it. We're just about to eradicate the polio. But still, we have cases in several countries, not very many, a few countries, and societies that we are not willing to cooperate with international organizations to eradicate the polio, and I will go into that in a minute. But let me say first that polio is very much debilitated. In 1988, so yesterday, had been a tremendous international effort to eradicate the disease, and back there, some years ago, 350,000 cases existed per year. Some thousand people were infected per day. The global vaccination campaign has since then brought that number down today to just 250 cases in the year 2012. That means last year. So it's very important. Look at the figures, 1988 to 2012. What is the big drop on cases? But still, we have cases in several countries, not very many, and that means that the eradication has not been completed. And not being completed, it may be back. What are the countries in which we still have problems, and why we have problems still? We have a particular number of countries, and basically 3, in which we have problems in order to eradicate polio. They are Nigeria, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And the 3 fundamentally for reasons which are interrelated. In order to vaccinate an entire country, as you can imagine, it's essential to have the cooperation of the people on the ground. The country where the vaccination are taking place must work together with the organization involved, being the United Nations, being the Organization of Health Organization for the world. Without national cooperation, vaccination is basically impossible. And this is what currently happening in the countries that I mentioned, in particular, some of them. There is a problem of lack of cooperation with authorities in some cases. So the vaccination workers from the UN are being, in some cases, attacked, and even in some dramatic cases, killed by members of the community that do not understand the significance of these people that are from the outside of the community, whose offer to help them is not well understood. So we have to do a very important campaign, not only of vaccination, but also of pedagogy, so that we can get accepted by the communities the presence of people from the international community trying to help them. How we could go along this to solve this problem? Let me first give you some data to put you into the perspective of what we're talking about. As we said, the cases are very few, but they are still present. And as I said, and I would like to repeat it again, eradication is impossible if the campaign is not completed. Recall that a campaign to eradicate polio is very costly. The international community is spending about $1 billion every year in this final step to eradicate the polio. So this effort can be completed not only with consequences of people or children across the world be saved from this terrible disease, but also the international community will also save huge sums of money that could be used for other global diseases and global problems. Now, if I say this related to the interplay of the governments, societies in countries where the vaccination has to finish, and the international community or the international actors, is because this is a fundamental interrelation. I would like to pay a particular respect to people in the United Nations, but not only in the global institutions, but also from private institutions, being big foundations. It comes to my mind, NGOs, maybe the Gates and Foundation or other foundations that are very much implicated in this battle against polio and eradication of this type of diseases. Now, what we have to do is to try to construct, as I said before, trust among the international actors and the countries in which the process is going to take place, the vaccination process is going to take place. I would like to say that although we had in the year 2012 some very serious difficulties, I have the sentiment, the hope that 2013 may be a better year for that. Some good changes have taken place in some of the three countries I mentioned before, and the possibility of moving into finishing the campaign. There are signs that announce that we may get into it. At the beginning of the year 2012, we had an important meeting in Geneva with the Association for Vaccination in the World, all the foundations, plus some of the international institutions like the United Nations. And I think we devised a plan in order to give trust and confidence to the members of that community, being in Pakistan, being in Afghanistan, being in Nigeria, that allowed to finalize this enormous effort that the international community is doing. Let me remind again that it's not only to save lives, which is the most important thing, but it's also to save money, a lot of money that could be used in order to do other things for people which are suffering in the world. Well, I'd like to finish this case. I think you have understood the basic elements of the case. We have another global good, which is global health, how difficult it is to do it, how sometimes a few problems that still are left in the international community, in the world, disturb and perturb the health of other people, of the rest of us, and how important, therefore, is to have elements to govern, and govern globally, the problem of this type of illnesses which are contagious. Now, we have touched climate change, which is clear to understand, I think, clean air, etc. We have touched another which has to do with health, how we can get the world free of some communicable diseases. The third one is a more practical case, but it's still a case that we do it every day. Many of you, many of us use it every day, this global good, without realizing the importance of having some governance mechanisms to be able to use it or to provide, to use that public good, even without realizing that we are doing it. Now, this third case will be related to the commercial aviation. All of you, probably you take a plane very frequently. The fact that planes take off from different airports at spans of a minute or an hour and arrive to hundreds of airports in the world, and the number of accidents are very limited, it means that somebody is taking care that that to happen. That means that a global good, which is free transportation through the air, through the skies, through aviation, it has to be organized, and therefore it has to be governed by some international or global schemes. Let me give you some data. The volume of goods transported per day in aviation is immense. And the number of people that take a plane every day is about 8 million people every single day. To compare with something, this is about the population of Switzerland. All the population of Switzerland flying every single day. Some 80,000 airplanes take off from different airports daily, as I said. Now, this is not of the same level, this good, is not of the same level of the two that we spoke before. This global good is, how would I say it, is less pure than the other two. What do I mean with that? I mean with that we recall what is the basic definition of a public good. There are two, that you cannot exclude anybody, and second, that the fact that you use it, it doesn't deplete the good. That means that others can use it also. It doesn't apply completely, because the regulation that we have in the global aviation allowed for a country to be eliminated for the use of their airline or their airport if they don't meet certain requirements. So, in a certain sense, this is what we call in the literature an impure global good. It's not as pure as the others two that I mentioned before. Again, the reason is because in some cases we can exclude some actor from using the good. Again, a country whose airports are not well prepared or whose airlines do not comply with the rules, they can be excluded. But in any case, I think it's a very important public good, although impure, to be analyzed because of the importance for the economy, global economy, and for the individual needs of citizens of the world. So, what mechanisms are in place to govern this global, although impure, good? The main multilateral piece of this global governance and on this domain is the ICAO. That means the International Civil Aviation Organization. This organization was founded almost 70 years ago. It is a technical and regulatory organization who produces norms and safety standards. We make it possible for planes, as I said before, to navigate safely and efficiently through the skies. It determines the standards for safety of infrastructure, inspection, etc., and establish the codes of conduct and so forth. Today there are about, 191 sure members of this ICAO, and it's an integral piece of the United Nations system. Therefore, it's part of the global governance. But besides this, which is a multilateral scheme, the ICAO, there are also bilateral relations between countries, or among countries, that can perfection the use of this structure to produce or to supply the good we are talking about. There are bilateral agreements which are called ASAs, Air Service Agreement, which are between normally two countries or more than two, that contain particular rules for air transport between those countries, specifying more details of permit routes, designated airlines, etc. But I mean, you can forget about that. Let's keep on talking about the multilateral scheme and multilateral agreement. Now, the question that you may ask yourself, and I ask myself every morning, is why it does work so well. Why we take an airport every day, sometimes with some delays, etc., but every day. Some of you will take it just every other week. And the plane takes off from country A and arrives to country B, sometimes after 17 hours or some many hours, in the final slot where it lands, etc. Sometimes that looks, if we take a step back and look at it, as a miracle, entre guillemets, not a miracle with capital M. But really it's fascinating that this happens with people, with goods, etc. Transport of goods. And only with this scheme of multilateral and bilateral set of rules which are accepted in goodwill by the different countries. So it may be cases in which the putting forward or putting in place these norms, these agreements are not as difficult as in the cases we talked before. Why is so? Well, fundamentally because this subject is more technical, if I may say, and less political sensitive. It has less to do with the history of a country. Everybody wants to have an airport, everybody wants to have an airline that takes people from your country to another country, to help your economy, to receive people from other places, to help tourism, etc. So it's less sensitive than the other issues in the short term. In the long term, no doubt that we have said before, being climate change or being the communicable diseases are much more damaging for the humanity as a whole. But these in the short term are very necessary to develop the economies. And although it's not a pure global good, it's a very good example of see how things can be done, if you allow me to say bottom up. We can find agreements between countries and elevate those agreements to a global consensus that allows a public good to be produced and to be supplied. And in this case, it's very important because, as I said before, it is fundamental for the development of our economies. Now, we have analyzed, if I stop a moment, we've analyzed 3 cases of what can be a public global good. We have seen the difficulties or the level of difficulty in the 3 cases. From the first to the third, the level of difficulty decreases. The more pure is the global good, the more difficult is to structure the governance. And fundamentally, it's for 2 reasons. One, because the number of free riders or people that profit from the good without providing to the supply is elevated. as we decrease that number, voluntarily or forcefully, the capacity to govern is much better, is much easier. But in any case, from the CO2 pollution to communicable diseases, to the way we can contribute to the global economy through mechanisms and rules for air transport, the same could have been said by maritime. Rules, norms are fundamental, and governance are fundamental. That is the big difference, as I said at the very beginning, between the way we handle national public goods, we have national governance, from the global public goods, in which we do not have still the mechanism, the total mechanisms, or the perfect mechanisms for governance in the world. It may take years. And that's why it's so important that every day we keep in mind the importance of looking at these global goods and trying to contribute every day to a better governance of them. Whatever we can do, whatever you can do, to move in that direction is a big contribution that you will do to make this world a better place.
So that was Javier Solana on global public goods and global governance. Let me pick up on his last point. He says it's almost magical that we have this much cooperation, international cooperation, around things like civil aviation. And I agree. And it's not just civil aviation. We have a way to transfer money across borders. We have a way to ensure that our phones work when we go to a foreign country. We have a way to launch satellites into orbits and make sure that those orbits don't crash into each other. We have mechanisms to store our seeds in global crop diversity vaults in different parts of the world. We have a way to share underground waters when more than one country shares them. It is remarkable, really, or magical in Javier Solana's words, to appreciate the cumulative result of all the cooperation that goes on around the world. Now, that happens when there aren't significant short-term costs to national countries in terms of wealth and in terms of sovereignty. So the question is, how do we achieve similar levels of cooperation when there are significant costs? And I suspect the answer to this question will have something to do with to what extent we feel we are in this together, and how much solidarity we wish to practice with each other. These are thorny issues. We'll keep on coming back to them. And I suspect throughout history, our working answers to these questions will continue to evolve. This week you had 2 reading assignments. One you had already completed, the report of the International Task Force on Global Governance. The second is the 2005 report of Kofi Annan, titled In Larger Freedom. Your writing assignment is going to be about global public goods. So define what they are and discuss whether thinking about the issues from weeks 3 to 7 as global public goods helps us analyze them better and produce solutions better. That's your assignment. Good luck.